A young, blind girl sat in a wheelchair, her eyes covered, her white dress motionless, clinging to the last vestiges of freedom music had offered her. She saw the approaching men, only felt the air shift as laughter replaced the sound of flowing water and footsteps drew too close. They pushed her forward, mocking her silence, believing darkness equated with power, and no one would dare speak up for her. The guitar slipped from her hands and fell to the stone pavement beneath her feet, a sharp sound piercing through her fear. As a foot rose toward the dog lying beside her, the air seemed to freeze. A Marine veteran paused, because some boundaries, once crossed, awaken instincts that never die. Before the story continues, please let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment touched your heart, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. Brightford's Central Park on a mid-autumn afternoon looked like something painted by a hand that favored gentle colors. Soft gold pooling in the grass, the lake trembling with a sheet of rippling light, and the lazy paths that curved like brushstrokes across an open canvas. The air held that crisp brightness only the northern states carried this time of year. Clean, sunlit, and touched by a faint chill that promised the cold months weren't far behind. Near the bandstand, beneath a maple whose leaves glowed like burnt copper, a young woman sat in a wheelchair with a guitar balanced lightly across her lap. Ellie Monroe, 28, had a posture that seemed simultaneously fragile and enduring. Her hair, light brown with natural waves, fell over her shoulders in gentle twists, and her skin, pale but warm-toned, caught the sunlight like porcelain with a heartbeat beneath it. What set her apart most, however, were her eyes. Clouded, unfocused, holding a pale bluish film that revealed her blindness long before she ever spoke of it. 2 years earlier, a drunk driver had crushed the car she rode in, taking her legs and her sight, but leaving her hands intact, and so she made music where the world once gave her motion. Beside her lay Halo, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, so dark along the back it looked almost ink-dipped. His build was large, muscular, trained, his amber eyes sharp yet quiet. The slight hitch in his left foreleg, barely noticeable unless he shifted weight, was a remnant of an untreated fracture from his younger years before Ellie found him and had him trained. Today he lay on the grass with regal stillness, his ears moving like small, finely tuned instruments, catching signals from everything around them. For a shepherd, alertness was a given, but in Halo it had evolved into something uncanny, a sense bordering on instinctive foresight. If Ellie was a melody, Halo was the harmony that guarded it. Her fingers strummed a progression, soft, clean, tender. A few children paused to listen, a jogger slowed, an elderly couple whispered how beautiful the music was. Ellie didn't see them, but she felt them. She felt the warmth of being part of the world, not just a shadow tucked behind its edges. Across the park, a man ran a steady jog along the gravel path. Dane Callahan, 55, was built like someone who had never learned how to be anything other than a soldier. Broad shoulders, a rigid torso, and a stride softened only slightly by an old injury in his right leg. His hair, dark brown, cut in a clean military undercut, was dusted with silver near the temples. His chin was strong, clean-shaven, and his features, even at rest, held the gravity of someone who had seen things he didn't talk about. The combat utility uniform he still wore, Marpat camo with scuffed desert boots, marked him unmistakably as a Marine, though technically he hadn't served for years. He lived alone outside town, in a cabin that rarely saw visitors, with no family left and not a single pet. He kept to himself. Solitude was easier. It didn't bleed. He wasn't planning to stop today. Running was his ritual, a way to keep thoughts filed away in the corners of his mind. But as he rounded a curve, the guitar's melody brushed his attention. Soft, tremulous, carrying a quiet ache he recognized. He slowed without meaning to. That softness felt almost dangerous to a man built entirely of edges. He let himself listen for only a second. That was when the music broke. The interruption was faint at first, a sharp exhale, Halo's sudden low rumble, but Dane heard it clearly. His instincts sharpened, narrowing onto the sound like a scope lining up a target. Near Ellie, 3 young men approached with the swagger particular to those who had never been denied anything. Brightford's wealthiest families produced boys like these every generation, handsome, well-fed, and empty in all the ways that mattered. Brent Calloway, tall, blond, and 22, walked in the lead with the easy arrogance of someone who had grown up knowing lawyers would always outrun consequences for him. His bomber jacket, navy and clearly expensive, hung loose on a lean but strong frame. His face would have been movie star charming if not for the perpetual smirk curling one corner of his mouth. Brent had the eyes of a man who enjoyed finding people he considered weaker and pushing until something broke. Flanking him were Tyler Briggs, dark-haired, shorter but muscular, with restless eyes that darted toward anything that might witness his bravado, and Miles Kent, a lanky boy with soft features and a nervous habit of running his hand through his hair. Of the 3, Miles was merely a follower, shaped by fear of being the target instead of the accomplice. They closed in like a storm Ellie couldn't see coming. Halo rose first, his body shifting from rest to guard stance in an instant. His ears speared forward, his tail stiffened, a soft, warning growl vibrated in his chest. Nothing aggressive yet, only protective. Brent laughed loud enough for the nearby path to hear. "Wow, look at this, a little concert." He nudged the back of Ellie's wheelchair with the toe of his expensive shoe, not hard, but enough to jolt her body forward. Did the blind girl bring a guard dog, or is this just for decoration? Ellie's breath hitched, but she held her voice steady. "Please don't do that." Tyler whistled, leaning close enough that Halo snapped his gaze to him. "Bet he can't even bite. Service dogs aren't allowed to fight, right?" Miles shifted uncomfortably. "Dude, maybe leave her alone. It's just a girl in the park." Brent shot him a glare, and Miles fell silent. Ellie's fingers curled around her guitar, not in anger, but in fear disguised as poise. She had been harassed before. She knew the subtle tremor of danger. She had learned to feel it in the air like a change in pressure before a storm. But Halo's growl deepened, and for a moment something strange flickered across his features. He lifted his head sharply, staring not at the boys, but at something behind them, something Ellie could not see, and Dane had not yet reached. His ears pivoted, his gaze narrowing as if tracing a path invisible to everyone else. Rehook, Fun, 1-3 mark. In that instant, Halo did something he had never done in Ellie's presence. He took one step backward, nudging her leg with a kind of urgency, as though warning her not of the boys before them, but of something coming from another direction entirely. A soft whine escaped him, low and vibrating, not fear, not submission, but message. It was a signal Ellie did not understand, but it pricked her skin like cold air. And miles away, in a cabin Dane had not returned to, a forgotten photograph of an old military team fell from a shelf, its frame cracking right across the face of the man who once stood beside Dane. Something had shifted. Something was coming. Brent didn't notice any of it. He only noticed Halo's moment of distraction and took it as weakness. "See? Dog's pathetic." Then he kicked Halo sharply in the ribs. Halo yelped and stumbled to the side, pain shooting through his old injury. Ellie gasped, clutching the armrest. "Stop! Don't touch him!" Tyler laughed nervously. Miles took a step back, guilt flickering in his eyes. And Dane stopped walking. His head snapped toward the sound, Halo's cry, and something old and razor-sharp ignited behind his blue-gray eyes. The disciplined calm of a Marine returning to alertness was unmistakable. He moved with quiet precision, closing the distance before any of the boys realized someone was approaching. Brent lifted his leg again, ready for another kick. Dane's hand clamped around his forearm mid-motion. The shock on Brent's face was instant. Dane's grip was iron, immovable, and his voice, low, gravelly, controlled, cut through the air like winter wind. "Enough." Tyler bristled and stepped forward, puffing up his chest. "Who the heller?" Dane didn't answer with words. He released Brent, stepped between the boys and Ellie, and turned just enough to shield both Halo and the wheelchair behind his body. His presence alone shifted the air. A wall, a barrier, a threat none of the privileged boys had ever been forced to recognize. Tyler reached to shove him. Dane caught his wrist with minimal effort, twisted it just enough to send a jolt of pain but no injury, and pushed him back. Tyler stumbled, wide-eyed. Miles froze completely. Brent regained his voice. "This isn't your business, old man." Dane's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in measurement. "It is now." Ellie sensed him there, sensed the sudden shadow that blocked the sun, and though she couldn't see him, she felt something settle inside her, something like safety wrapped in disbelief. Halo, in pain, crawled closer to Dane's boot and pressed against it. Dane looked down, noticing the tremble in the dog's flank, then lifted his gaze to the boys again with an expression that hollowed them from the inside. "You will leave," he said quietly. "Now." Brent opened his mouth to retort, but the sound died at his throat. There was something in Dane's eyes, the weight of battles, of buried comrades, of nights spent wondering why he had survived when better men hadn't. Something ancient and immovable, something Brent had never encountered and could not name. The three boys retreated, muttering under their breath, but not daring to look back. When they were finally gone, Dane crouched down, examining Halo's ribs without touching the tender spot. Halo looked up at him with a rumbling exhale, a strange mixture of gratitude and caution. Ellie whispered, voice trembling, Are they gone?" "Yes," Dane answered. She swallowed, gripping her guitar tighter. "Thank you. I didn't know what to do." Dane stood, stepping back enough to give her space, but not so far that she felt alone. "You don't owe me thanks." Halo rose slowly and nudged Ellie's hand, as if reassuring her now that the danger had passed. And there, in the amber light of a fading afternoon, the three of them, one broken soldier, one blind musician, and one wounded guardian, stood in a triangle of unexpected fate. None of them knew it yet, but the quiet thread of destiny had already knotted around their lives, pulling them toward a path none of them could walk alone. That was how their story began. Dane had seen injuries before, too many, too varied, too violent to count, but watching Halo limp beside Ellie's wheelchair stirred something deeper than the memory of war. The German shepherd walked with a stiff, protective determination, leaning neither away from pain nor toward comfort, as if shielding Ellie from the knowledge that he hurt at all. Dane walked on her other side, silent, the gravel path crunching beneath 3 sets of uneven steps that did not match, but somehow moved together. The veterinary clinic sat near the corner of Main and Willow, a small converted brick house painted forest green with white trim. It had a wooden sign carved with a paw print and the name Brightford Animal Care. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and cedar shavings. The receptionist led them quickly to an exam room after seeing Halo's strained breathing. Dr. Mason Hargrove entered with the practiced calm of a man who had spent 30 years watching suffering and choosing, again and again, not to look away. He was in his early 60s, tall with a narrow, bony frame softened only by kindness. His hair, once chestnut, had turned a misty silver and was tied back loosely at the nape. His face bore long creases from years of squinting in thought, but his eyes, hazel, gentle, remained steady and alert. He spoke with a measured patience, his voice low enough to calm animals and humans alike. "Well now," Dr. Hargrove murmured as Halo attempted to stand straighter. You don't need to be brave for me, boy. He crouched, examining the ribs with slow, deliberate pressure. Halo didn't yelp. He merely closed his eyes and endured. Ellie gripped the armrest of her wheelchair until her knuckles whitened. I'm so sorry, Halo. I should have heard them coming. Hush, the doctor said gently, glancing at her with soft compassion. This isn't your fault, and he knows that. Dane stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes locked on the dog like a hawk, watching for danger even inside a safe room. Something about Halo reminded him of the military dogs he once worked alongside, silent comrades whose loyalty had no boundaries. He respected that instinctively. After X-rays and a brief wait, Dr. Hargrove returned with the results. He has 2 fractured ribs, he said, laying the images on the table. And these markings, he pointed to faint shadowed lines. This isn't the first time he's taken a blow of this force. Someone's hurt him before. The room tightened around Ellie as though the walls had shifted inward. Before? But I rescued him. He was abandoned, but I thought he was just scared. Dane looked at Halo's ribs again, his jaw tightening. This was deliberate. Someone kicked him hard. Ellie's breath caught. Halo, I'm so sorry. Her voice cracked in a way that wasn't about guilt, but about the helplessness she hated, an emotion that had lived inside her since the accident 2 years ago. Halo stepped closer, pressing his head against her knee, and she curled forward over him, whispering apologies that had no place being hers. Dane watched her shoulders tremble. She wasn't made of fragility, he realized. She was made of endurance, and endurance always carried cracks. The doctor's treatment plan was simple: pain medication, rest, and careful handling. Halo tolerated the wrapping with stoic cooperation. But the true fracture in the room wasn't in Halo's bones. It was in Ellie's silence afterward. Dane could feel it. When they stepped outside, the sun had softened to early evening light, the kind that looked like the world was exhaling. Ellie suddenly spoke, almost to herself. This isn't the first time someone hurt me. Dane turned his head toward her, waiting. She swallowed. The accident that blinded me? I don't remember much, only flashes, sounds. What kind of sounds? Dane asked quietly. An engine, loud, like someone revving to show off. She paused. Music, heavy bass, someone laughing, young, careless, like they were daring the world to move out of their way. Dane's blood chilled, not from fear, but recognition. Loud engine, thudding music, drunken, youthful laughter. Brent Calloway drove a heavily modified black pickup, engine peeled open for noise, subwoofers built into the back, and a habit of blasting music loud enough to rattle headlights. Everyone in Brightford knew the sound of that truck. Everyone except Ellie, because she could no longer see it. He kept his voice level, though something old and sharp twisted inside him. Do you remember anything else? Ellie shook her head. Just everything going quiet after the crash. Halo, walking beside her, lifted his head and briefly nudged Dane's hand, an unusual gesture, almost like urging him toward a truth he didn't yet want to say aloud. Re-hook, 1-3 mark. Halo suddenly stopped walking entirely. His ears snapped upright, his muscles stiffened, and he stared, not at the ground or the path ahead, but slightly above Ellie's shoulder, as though he sensed someone behind them. His lips parted without sound, a silent warning only Dane seemed to understand. Dane turned, scanning the park's edge, and for a fleeting second he saw the reflection of something dark in a distant car window, watching, idling. When he blinked, it was gone. The moment passed, but a shiver of premonition trailed behind it. Something in Halo's behavior whispered that the past wasn't simply memory. It was moving. Dane exhaled slowly. We should report what happened. All of it. Ellie hesitated. The police won't listen. They never do when someone powerful is involved. He didn't argue. He simply started pushing her wheelchair toward the station, Halo trotting close, despite the pain. Brightford Police Station sat in a squat brick building near the town's administrative center. Inside, Sergeant Mulligan stood behind the counter. He was in his late 50s, with a burly frame and a heavy mustache that covered most of his upper lip. His cheeks were ruddy, and his small brown eyes shifted with the calculation of a man who liked his job steady and unchallenged. Mulligan had been on the force for 30 years and had learned one truth. Maintaining relationships with wealthy families made life smoother. When he spotted Dane, marine posture unmistakable, he straightened slightly, but relaxed again when he saw Ellie. "What can I do for you folks?" Dane spoke plainly. A group of young men assaulted her and her service dog. One of them was Brent Calloway. A flicker of discomfort crossed Mulligan's face. "Calloway? Well, that's unfortunate. But these boys, you know how kids are, roughhousing, misunderstandings." "He broke the dog's ribs," Dane interrupted, voice steady but iron-forged. "And he threatened her." Ellie added quietly, "I think he might be tied to my accident 2 years ago." Mulligan's expression shuddered. He lifted a hand. "Let's not jump to conclusions. That accident was ruled, well, inconclusive. And bringing up families like the Calloways, that creates tension we don't need." Dane leaned forward, and for a moment, Mulligan looked like a man standing too close to an open furnace. "Do your job, Sergeant." But Mulligan only forced a thin smile. "I'll file a report. I can't promise more." It was as close to dismissal as one could give without saying the words. Outside, Ellie's face was pale, not with fear, but resignation. She had expected this. Truth rarely mattered when it threatened money. They had barely returned to the sidewalk when her phone buzzed. "Unknown number," she answered hesitantly. A man's voice, smooth and rehearsed, filled her ear. "Miss Monroe, this is Gordon Pike, legal representative of the Calloway family." His tone was warm the way a snake's skin was smooth, pleasant until it tightened. "I understand there was a disagreement today. The Calloways would like to offer a generous settlement to avoid misunderstandings." "I don't want money," Ellie whispered. "Of course," he continued, as though she hadn't spoken. "We would also require your signature on a non-disclosure agreement. And I must mention, strictly informally, that your rental agreement is up for renewal soon. The Calloways own that building." Dane saw Ellie's hands tremble and stepped closer, listening but letting her speak. She swallowed hard. "You're threatening me." "We prefer to think of it as mutually beneficial clarity." Then the line clicked dead. Halo pressed his head against her lap. She leaned over him, arms wrapping around his neck. "I can't lose my home," she whispered. "I can't lose him." Dane didn't touch her. He wasn't the kind of man who reached out easily. But something in his gaze softened, the way a storm softens just enough to reveal the sky behind it. Halo lifted his eyes to Dane again, steady, intelligent, almost pleading. For the first time since his discharge, Dane felt something like purpose returning to him, slow as dawn, but just as undeniable. When he helped Ellie into the taxi to go home, she slipped a piece of paper from her pocket, the one he had given her earlier, with his number written in large block letters she could feel with her fingers. Her thumb hesitated over her phone screen. For 2 years she had handled every fear alone. For the first time, she didn't want to. She pressed call, and the line began to ring. The next blow didn't come with fists or boots. It arrived folded in white envelopes and spoken through careful, polite voices that never raised themselves above a courteous tone. Ellie Monroe sat at the small kitchen table of her studio apartment, the one room that held her entire world, Easel, canvases, a narrow bed, the chipped counter with its stubborn faucet, and ran her fingers over the raised edge of the letter. The landlord had not come himself. The notice had been slipped under her door with the efficiency of someone who preferred not to witness the consequences of their choices. Due to a restructuring of financial commitments, she mouthed the words as the volunteer from the community arts office read it aloud over the phone. The woman's voice was apologetic, young, nervous. "Your lease will not be renewed. You have 30 days to vacate." 30 days? To uproot not just her bed and clothes, but the fragile sense of safety she had managed to sew together in the 2 years since the accident. She ended the call politely, thanked the woman for reading, and placed the phone on the table. The second envelope lay open beside her, this one from the City Council. Permit to perform in public spaces, suspended pending review. There was no accusation, only vague language about concerns raised by local citizens and the need to ensure public comfort. She could hear the subtext clearly. Someone had complained, and that someone's name carried more weight than her song. Across from her, Halo lay on the floor, his bandaged ribs rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. The German shepherd looked smaller in pain, but his eyes remained bright. He watched her with a concern that felt, at times, more human than animal. When her fingers tightened around the notice with a soft crumple of paper, he pushed himself up, limped over, and placed his head on her lap. "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. "It's just paper." But the paper represented money she would not earn, a home she would not keep, and a life being quietly constricted by unseen hands. The row of rental buildings where she lived sat on the edge of town, a cluster of narrow 2-story structures with peeling paint and metal staircases that whined under every step. Wind moved easily through the gaps between them, picking up stray leaves and carrying conversation from one balcony to the next. It was the kind of place where privacy was thin and survival depended on paying rent on time and not drawing attention. Attention had found her anyway. That night the wind sharpened, making the old windows rattle. Ellie lay awake, listening to Halo's breathing beside her bed. The room smelled faintly of linseed oil and detergent, her life compressed into scent and sound. Sometime past midnight she heard Halo stir. The bed creaked as she shifted. "What is it, boy?" Halo didn't answer with a bark. Instead, he moved to the door, his nails clicking softly on the worn wooden floor, and stood there, head tilted, ears pricked. Then he whined, long, low, a sound threaded with something she had come to recognize in him. Not fear, not excitement, but a kind of calling. She unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Cold night air slipped in, smelling of damp earth and distant pine. Halo stepped out onto the narrow balcony, shoulders tense, and turned his gaze toward the dark line of forest beyond the farthest houses. The trees were nothing more than a silhouette at this distance, but he stared at them as if they were speaking. His tail hung low, not tucked, but thoughtful. Ellie moved her wheelchair to the threshold and listened. There was nothing. No cars, no footsteps, only the wind and an occasional far-off dog answering some invisible signal. Halo gave a soft, broken series of whines, then went quiet and simply stood guard, chest lifting and falling in a slow rhythm. "Are you calling someone?" she murmured. "Or are you hearing something I can't?" He didn't turn to look at her. He only kept his eyes on the tree line, like a soldier watching a border. Rehook, 2-3 mark. For a moment, as Ellie listened to the wind, a memory rose, one she hadn't touched in months. The sound of an engine, too loud, too confident, rushing past the forest road the night of her accident. In her mind, it blurred with the rustle of leaves. As she sat there in the doorway, she heard a faint echo riding the night air, not an actual engine, but the ghost of that roar weaving with the wind. Halo stiffened, ears twitching, and let out a single, sharp bark, pointed straight toward the unseen highway beyond the woods. It was as if he too were hearing something from that night, some thread stretched between then and now. The bark snapped the memory like glass. Ellie shivered. Somewhere between the trees and the road, the past had started to move. The next day brought no miracles. Her landlord stopped by mid-morning. Mr. Henderson was a man in his late 50s with a soft belly and thinning sandy hair combed carefully over a scalp he pretended not to know was exposed. His face had once been kind, but years of financial anxiety had turned his expression into a permanent wince. He stood in her doorway, hat in hand, eyes not quite meeting hers. "Miss Monroe," he said, voice roughened with cigarettes and regret. "I'm sorry about the notice. It's not personal. I've got investors. They're consolidating properties." She listened, fingers resting on Halo's back. Investors with the last name Calloway? He flinched just enough to answer her question. "I can't afford to cross them," he admitted. "They're talking about buying the whole block. If I don't cooperate, I lose everything. I wish it were different." Ellie nodded once. "Me too." He left with his shoulders rounded, a man who had chosen survival over justice. So many times he no longer recognized the difference. As evening fell, the wind picked up again, whistling down the narrow gap between the buildings. Ellie sat on the small landing outside her door, guitar in hand, Halo resting his head on the top step. She played softly, more to soothe herself than to practice. Without a permit, she couldn't go back to the park. They had taken her stage and her income, but not her music yet. She didn't hear the car pull up, but Halo did. His ears snapped forward. He lifted his head, then pushed himself upright despite the pain still lacing his side. His eyes went hard, focused, as a pair of male voices drifted up from the bottom of the stairwell. "Can't believe we're doing this," one of them muttered, his tone jittery, familiar. Tyler Briggs. "Relax," the other voice said, dripping with the lazy contempt Brightford had come to know well. "Brent Calloway. We're just having a little chat. Dad says she's being stubborn. People like her need incentives." Halo growled, low and deep. Ellie set the guitar aside. "Halo?" Heavy footsteps started up the metal stairs. The structure shuddered with each impact. Ellie's heart began to race. She couldn't see them, but she felt the air change, tighter, colder. She grabbed the armrests of her chair, the metal slick under her palms. Brent's figure appeared first at the bend of the staircase, a tall shape in a designer jacket, blonde hair perfectly arranged as always, jaw set in a smirk that didn't match the tension in his eyes. Behind him, Tyler followed, shorter, stockier, his dark hair sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it anxiously. "Well, look at that," Brent drawled. "The blind songbird and her broken mutt." Halo stepped between them and Ellie, hackles raised. His growl vibrated through the narrow stairwell, vibrating against the metal. Tyler shifted from foot to foot. "Brent, maybe we should just go. This is dumb." Brent ignored him. "You've been ignoring our generous offer, Miss Monroe," he said, leaning on the railing, his voice dripping with false charm. "My family doesn't like being ignored. You sign the paper, this all goes away. You keep your place. Your dog gets his vet bills paid. Everybody wins." "And if I don't?" Ellie asked, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Brent's smile thinned. "Then things get less comfortable." Halo barked once, a sharp crack of sound that made Tyler flinch. Brent raised his foot slightly, as if to step closer. He never got the chance. A new voice cut through the stairwell, low and calm with a steel core that bent for no one. "If you're not afraid today," it said, "I'll teach you what fear is tomorrow." Brent and Tyler turned at the same time. Dane Callahan stood at the mouth of the alley, one boot on the bottom step, his Marpat uniform marked with dust and years of use, broad shoulders filling the narrow entrance with a presence that felt almost physical. His blue-gray eyes looked up at them without hurry, but there was nothing soft in them now, only a cold clarity that had seen worse men than these break much faster. The wind tugged at the loose edges of his sleeves, fluttering the fabric like the ghost of a battle flag. Tyler paled. "That's the guy from the park," he hissed. Brent tried to straighten, clinging desperately to his old script. "This is private property, old man. You don't belong here." Dane stepped up one stair, then another, each movement deliberate. "I belong anywhere someone thinks they can hurt a woman and her dog for sport." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The air seemed to lean closer, just to hear him. "You're done." Brent's bravado cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough. He looked at Halo, then at Dane, and for the first time, calculation lost to something else. Memory of how quickly the Marine had moved in the park, how efficiently he'd reduced 3 men to terrified boys. "We're leaving," Tyler muttered, tugging at Brent's sleeve. Brent hesitated, pride and fear warring across his face. In the end, fear won. "This isn't over," he spat, but the words sounded small in the stairwell. He turned, feet clanging down the metal steps, Tyler on his heels. They disappeared into the alley, their footsteps fading into the murmur of the town. Silence fell, heavy and fragile. Dane reached the landing and stopped a respectful distance from Ellie. "You all right?" She exhaled shakily. "I think so." Halo, breathing hard from the effort and the stress, limped forward. He looked up at Dane for a long, searching moment, amber eyes reflecting the dim light from the hallway. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped closer and lowered his head until it rested on the toe of Dane's boot. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of a verdict. Ellie heard the soft thump of Halo's chin on leather and smiled, small and astonished. "He doesn't do that for just anyone," she said quietly. Dane looked down at the dog, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. "He's got good instincts," he murmured. Later, when the sky had deepened into a deep blue-gray and the wind had softened to a restless whisper, they stayed there on the landing. Dane sat on the top step, his back against the railing, one elbow resting on his knee. Ellie cradled her guitar again, fingers moving over the strings with a tenderness that felt like prayer more than practice. Halo lay between them, his body forming a warm, living bridge, head occasionally turning to check on one, then the other. The song Ellie played was quiet, a melody that spoke of roads not taken and homes not yet found. Dane listened with his eyes half closed, the lines in his face easing just enough to make him look almost like the man he might have been if the world had given him a gentler path. For a little while, the threats and notices and ghosts of old engines faded. There were only 3 tired souls, sharing a slice of borrowed peace on a metal staircase that trembled softly in the wind. And though none of them said it aloud, something had shifted. They were no longer just a soldier, a blind musician, and her dog. They were, slowly, becoming a we. The move happened faster than Ellie expected, and perhaps faster than her heart was prepared for. Dane had shown up the next morning with the same quiet certainty that marked all his decisions. He stood in the hallway of the old apartment row, broad-shouldered in his Marpat uniform, the early light catching the silver at his temples, and simply said, "Pack what you can carry. I found a place." He sounded as if the matter had been settled long before he spoke. Maybe for him, it had. Halo circled the boxes with soft huffs, nudging Ellie's ankles as if urging her onward. He was healing slowly. His ribs were still tender, but his spirit had regained its usual sharp alertness. He watched Dane with the steady devotion of a soldier recognizing another who'd been shaped by battle. Every time Dane lifted a box, Halo followed his movements, eyes tracking him like a compass needle drawn to north. The new home sat at the edge of the older part of Brightford, where houses were built from thick timber and memories. Nora Llewellyn's place rose from the earth like something that had weathered storms and kept its stories inside. The house was 2 stories tall, painted a faded light blue with white trim, and fronted by a wide wooden porch that sagged gently at one corner. The yard smelled of hydrangeas and pine mulch. Nora herself stood in the doorway with arms crossed, a small, wiry woman in her 70s with silver hair pinned in a loose bun. Her face was narrow, with high cheekbones and a stern mouth, but her eyes were a startling pale green that softened her otherwise rigid demeanor. Her sweater was deep maroon, patched at the elbows, and she wore thick wool socks inside old leather slippers. She looked like the kind of woman who could both scold a stranger and bring them soup in the same breath. "You're late," she said without preamble. Dane didn't flinch. "We're 5 minutes early." Nora sniffed. "Then you're here just in time." She squinted at Ellie's wheelchair, her gaze sharp. "You'll need the ramp around the left side. Built it for my husband when he got sick. Still sturdy?" Ellie smiled gently. "Thank you, ma'am." Nora blinked at the word ma'am, as if allergic to politeness. Then she nodded curtly. "Well, come inside before the wind decides to push you back to where you came from." The interior was warm, faded quilt patterns, shelves full of books with cracked spines, the faint scent of citrus cleaner and fresh bread. A single framed photograph sat on the mantel. Nora with a tall, lean black man with kind eyes and dimples, both laughing near a rowboat on Brightford Lake, her late husband. His presence lingered in the house like a soft hum. Dane carried in boxes while Ellie explored the room by touch, her palms brushing over smooth wooden counters, textured wallpaper, the carved rail of the staircase she wouldn't need to climb. Halo walked beside her, guiding her gently when she drifted too, close to corners. Nora watched the dog with a critical eye at first, but softened when Halo sat politely and offered his paw without instruction. She muttered. "At least one man in this house has manners." Dane, passing by with a box, raised an eyebrow. "I heard that." "Good." By afternoon, Ellie's room was arranged, her easel in the corner near a window, guitar on a stand beside the bed, her few clothes neatly folded in drawers Dane had repaired with his own hands. When she thanked him for the 100th time, he responded the same way he always did, with a nod and the quiet sincerity of someone who did not help for thanks. The next morning brought sunlight crisp as an apple. Ellie insisted on returning to the park, though her permit was still suspended. "I won't perform for money," she said. "I'll just be there. Music doesn't need permission." Brightford Park felt different near the lake. The air carried the scent of moss, and the water shimmered with small waves that tapped the shore like gentle applause. The wooden benches circling the lake were occupied mostly by middle-aged locals, men in fishing hats, women in knitted shawls, retirees walking slow laps. Ellie settled under a willow tree whose branches swayed lightly in the breeze. She ran her fingers along her guitar's neck as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. Halo lay between her and Dane, head lifted, ears relaxed. The people nearby quieted gradually, drawn by something they couldn't name. She played her first note. It sounded like a thought made audible. The melody that followed drifted across the lake. Soft, longing, hopeful. Her voice joined it, low and warm, shaped by emotion rather than volume. Conversations tapered off. Even the birds seemed to pause. Dane sat with elbows on his knees, head bowed, letting the music soak through him like the softest kind of healing. He didn't smile, but his eyes gentled, losing some of their usual guardedness. A few listeners approached, asking shy questions between songs. A woman in her 50s with cropped gray hair and gardening gloves paused to tell Ellie that her music Feels like the lake is breathing again. Another man with a cane wiped a tear and dropped off a small bouquet of daisies. Word traveled faster than Ellie anticipated. The people who had once only passed by her playing now lingered, listening, then returned the next day bringing friends. Someone suggested she perform in the upcoming Summer Light Festival, a beloved Brightford tradition featuring lanterns, music, and boats drifting across the lake at dusk. "You'd be perfect," said Mrs. Turner, a retired school librarian with curly salt-and-pepper hair and a warm, round face. She smelled faintly of lavender and wore a knitted scarf she proudly announced she had made 20 years ago. "The town could use a voice like yours, reminds people of gentleness." Ellie flushed with a mixture of pride and disbelief. I don't know. I don't even have a permit right now." Mrs. Turner waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, please. Half the town would sign a petition to get you on that stage. The council can't ignore everyone." As the woman walked off, Halo let out a soft bark, not sharp, but thoughtful. His ears were pointed toward the water. Halo had always been alert, but over the next few days his nightly behavior shifted. Each evening, after Ellie practiced, he would wander to the porch facing the lake. He would stand there, still, tall, focused, not watching for intruders, but staring at the dark water as if reading something written beneath its surface. Sometimes he emitted a quiet whine, barely audible. Nora noticed first. "Your dog's got an old soul," she said, stirring tea with slow, practiced motions. "Some animals see storms before we do." Ellie tilted her head. "Storms?" "Not the weather kind. Worse things than that." Dane had remained standing near the window during this exchange, arms crossed, eyes tracking Halo through the glass. It wasn't fear he felt, it was recognition. Halo wasn't nervous. He was anticipating something. Re-hook, mid-chapter twist. On the fourth night, as Ellie tuned her guitar on the porch, Halo suddenly grew still. His breath slowed, his ears lifted, his entire posture braced. Dane looked up immediately. Halo stepped forward, nose pointed toward the lake. Then he whimpered, not in pain, but in warning. A moment later, the surface of the water rippled violently, though no wind touched it. Nora opened the screen door, frowning. "Something's coming," she murmured. "And it's not the weather." The sound was too faint for Ellie to hear, but Dane caught it. An engine revving in the distance. The same pattern Ellie described from her accident, but muffled, distorted, as if someone were testing something near the lake's far road. Dane felt his stomach tighten. Halo turned back to him and barked once, sharp, urgent, prophetic. The moment passed, leaving the porch swallowed in uneasy quiet. The next morning, Ellie practiced again at the lakeside. Children gathered to listen, their parents lingering behind them with soft smiles. The water reflected sunlit ripples, gentle and innocent, belying the tension that Halo sensed. Dane sat nearby, his gaze shifting between Ellie, the lake, and the tree line, like a guardian caught between peace and threat. When she finished her final piece, Ellie leaned her head toward him. "You've been quiet." He hesitated, then spoke with the honesty that marked every word he chose to share. "If something happens, don't panic. Just listen for my voice and Halo's. We'll lead you." Halo let out a soft chuff as if agreeing. Ellie smiled faintly. "I believe you." 3 figures sat together beneath the willow, the soldier, the blind musician, and the dog who saw what humans could not. Though the afternoon glowed warm with sunlight, the shadow of something approaching lingered at the edge of the lake's calm surface. But for now, there was music and the fragile peace that grows between people who are learning to trust. And sometimes, peace is the quiet before truth arrives. The evening before the Summer Light Festival, Brightford Lake shimmered beneath strings of lanterns hung by volunteers. The entire town seemed to hum with anticipation. Children practiced carrying their paper lantern boats. Merchants prepared food stalls, and the old willow trees around the lake were draped in soft golden bulbs that glowed like captured stars. Ellie Monroe had never performed at a festival since losing her sight, and even though she could not see the preparations, she felt the excitement through the shifting rhythms around her, footsteps of families passing by, laughter rising and falling like waves, and the affectionate greetings from townsfolk who had begun treating her as part of the heartbeat of Brightford. Dane stood near the end of the wooden performance bridge earlier that day, examining the structure with the precision of a man who trusted instincts over appearances. The bridge stretched across the shallowest part of the lake, wide enough for musicians and photographers to stand on, but narrow enough that people gathered around the shore to listen. Lanterns hung from upright wooden posts, swaying softly in the breeze. It was picturesque, peaceful, and in Dane's eyes, dangerously exposed. He crouched near the railing, fingers tracing the wood grain, then the screws. Something felt wrong. Not loose enough to break, but loosened deliberately. Too deliberate to be weather. He followed the line of screws to the far corner, where fresh tool marks, thin, sharp grooves, cut through the old varnish. Someone had tampered with the structure in the last 24 hours. Halo, standing nearby, stiffened. His ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air along the railing. The German shepherd let out a low growl, not loud, not showy, but a deep, warning tremor that came from the instinct of a dog who sensed human malice in the wood dust left behind. Dane's jaw clenched. Someone was here. He inspected the underside of the bridge next, kneeling with military precision. A faint metal smell revealed itself, residue from a small tool. And then, tucked near the edge, a white thread of fuse cord. Not enough to explode anything deadly, but enough to startle a dog or make someone lose balance. That was when the truth sharpened. Brent wasn't done. And this time, he wasn't looking for a fight. He was building an accident? Dane reached into the small pouch, clipped to his belt, and pulled out a discreet miniature camera. Black, weather-resistant, no bigger than a thumb. It was military-grade equipment repurposed for civilian life. He wedged it beneath the beam facing the length of the bridge, ensuring it would capture anyone approaching the tampered section. Halo leaned over the edge, gazing at Dane, amber eyes reflecting the lake's ripples. He gave a soft chuff, approval, or maybe shared tension. "We'll catch them," Dane murmured. "And this time, they won't hide behind their last name." The yow. Night. As the house grew quiet, Halo woke again, ears twitching, muscles taut. He stood from the rug in Ellie's room, limped slightly due to his healing ribs, and walked to the window overlooking the lake. Ellie stirred. "Halo?" He didn't look at her. He stared outward, body rigid. A low rumble rose from his chest, not fear, but certainty. Ellie slid her hand along his back, feeling the vibration. "Is something coming?" Halo whined once, sharp and soft. Across the house, Dane had risen from his cot before Halo even made a sound. Some instincts do not fade, and the Marine inside him recognized the pressure of an unseen shift in the air. He walked into the hall just as Halo stepped out of Ellie's room, their eyes meeting in the dim sliver of moonlight. "You feel it too," Dane whispered. Halo bumped his head against Dane's knee, an urgent gesture. Rehook near 1-3 point. For an instant, a gust of lake wind hit the house so suddenly that the porch chimes rattled in frantic disarray. Nora Llewellyn's old wind chimes rarely made noise unless the weather turned foul, yet the sky was clear. Ellie stepped into the hallway, gripping the doorframe, sensing tension even without sight. Halo stared through the screen door toward the lake, unblinking. In the reflection of the glass, Dane caught a brief flicker, like the glow of a lighter being tested in the woods. It vanished before he could identify it, but Halo's sudden, sharp bark fractured the silence. Something out there was rehearsing harm. The past wasn't haunting, it was planning. By morning, the uneasy silence was gone, replaced by the vibrant hum of festival day. Brightford Lake glittered with preparations, lanterns strung like constellations, food stands arranged in crescent rows, families strolling with cups of cider. Ellie sat in her wheelchair near the willow tree, guitar resting in her lap. Her fingers tapped along the frets in silent rehearsal. "You ready?" Dane asked, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, but gaze scanning everything. "I think so," she said. "But I'm nervous." Being nervous means you care. Halo lay at her feet, still and watchful. Though the crowd buzzed with excitement, his gaze kept returning to the wooden bridge. Festival organizers guided Ellie to the performance area. She heard children running on the grass, vendors calling out their specials, the soft glide of people taking pictures. The sun dipped, turning the lake's surface into liquid gold. Lanterns flickered awake one by one. Ellie was guided onto the bridge, Halo at her side, Dane close behind. The wood creaked under their weight, but the section Dane had reinforced held firm beneath his boot. He had tightened every screw himself. Not enough to reveal tampering, but enough to stop disaster. As Ellie settled near the railing, Halo lay down, positioning himself between her and the lake. Dane stood several steps behind, hands clasped lightly behind his back, eyes darting along the crowd. His pulse beat in a tight, controlled rhythm. Combat concentration. The music began. Ellie's voice drifted into the warm evening air. Gentle, trembling, then strengthening as the crowd leaned in, captivated. Her guitar's chords rippled across the lake, echoing between lantern-lit water and the darkening sky. Behind the boathouse on the far side of the lake, three silhouettes crouched: Brent, Tyler, and Miles. Brent wore an expensive jacket and the smugness of a man who believed himself untouchable. His blonde hair gleamed under the lantern glow. Tyler, rubbing his hands anxiously, looked thinner than before, fear carving hollows beneath his eyes. Miles, tall and bony with a perpetually nervous slouch, kept glancing over his shoulder. "Just light it and get it over with," Brent hissed. Tyler flicked a lighter. "This is crazy, man. She's blind. What if—" "That's the point," Brent snapped. "She leans the wrong way. Dog freaks out. Railing gives. Accident. No witnesses who'd believe anything else. And she stops asking questions." Miles swallowed, face pale. "What about the guy? The Marine?" Brent smirked. "He can't save her twice." The fuse sparked. Crackling embers hissed toward the launch point, a cluster of small firecracker tubes aimed at the bridge posts. Halo's head snapped up before the first pop. He bolted to his feet, ribs protesting but ignored. His bark ripped through the tranquil music, startling the nearest listeners. Dane reacted instantly. "Ellie, switch sides!" Before she could ask why, he moved. One hand gripped the handle of her wheelchair, flipping its orientation away from the weakened railing. His boot anchored it safely. Halo pressed his body against her legs, shielding her from the blast, not retreating. Firecrackers exploded in a sharp series of bangs. Lanterns swung violently. People screamed, though nothing caught fire. The blasts had been designed for shock, not destruction. The railing shuddered under the sudden vibration, but did not fall, because Dane had already restored it. Across the lake, Miles froze. Tyler stumbled back, Brent's face drained of color as he realized the truth. The bridge hadn't collapsed. And worse, something blinked beneath the boards. A camera light? Recording. Dane stepped forward, voice low but carrying across the stunned silence. "Festival security is already on the way." Though he hadn't called them yet, the sentence was enough. Brent's composure shattered. He grabbed Tyler and Miles, dragging them back into the shadows as Halo growled with the fury of a dog who knew exactly who had meant harm. But there would be no escape. Not tonight. Ellie, trembling, reached down and touched Halo's head. "You saved me again," she whispered. Dane knelt beside them. His voice was steady. No, he warned us. I only moved you. Halo pressed against both of them, one heartbeat, shared between three forms. Lanterns swayed in the lake breeze, scattering warm light across their faces. And a few yards away, hidden among the bushes, Brent Calloway stared at the bridge that refused to break, and understood for the first time that the truth he had tried to bury was finally clawing its way toward daylight. Dawn broke over Harbor's Rest with a clarity that felt almost symbolic. Thin golden light spilling across the water, brushing the tops of the birch trees, warming rooftops, and gently settling on the wooden railings of the Lakeside Community Hall. Dane Carter arrived early, as he always did. Routine was the last discipline he carried from the Marines, and it steadied him now as he prepared for a day he never imagined himself stepping into. A public hearing where truth, long buried beneath lies and fear, would finally be spoken aloud. Halo walked beside him, the 5-year-old German shepherd moving with a quiet alertness. His coat, black and tan and thick as winter grass, gleamed faintly under the sun. His amber eyes swept the walkway, the steps, the benches, and each stranger arriving. Halo had always been wary, but today something coiled tightly in him, as if he understood this gathering was no ordinary meeting. Inside the hall, Ellie waited with her hands folded gently on her lap. She wore a soft cream sweater and dark slacks, dressed by Nora Llewellyn that morning with the same care a grandmother might offer. Her long, dark hair was tied loosely behind her shoulders, and though her blind eyes remained fixed toward the wooden floor, her posture showed both trembling nerves and unmistakable resolve. This was the first time she would speak of the accident in front of a room full of people, not as a victim summoned by duty, but as a woman reclaiming her past. Dane took a seat beside her. Halo settled between them, leaning his weight slightly against Ellie's leg. She exhaled slowly and whispered, "He knows I'm scared." "He does," Dane replied, "and he's telling you we're right here." Just then, the hall door opened again, letting in a sharp breath of morning air, and Deputy Grace Nolan. Grace was in her late 20s, tall and athletic, with chestnut hair pulled into a disciplined ponytail. Her face held the softness of someone who genuinely cared, and the steel of someone who could not be intimidated. Her uniform was pressed crisp, but her sleeves were rolled once at the forearm, a telltale sign she was ready to work, not merely watch. She stepped toward Dane and quietly handed back the flash drive he'd delivered last night. "I saw everything," she said. "I forwarded it directly to the county prosecutor before Chief Mulligan could intercept it." Dane let out a slow breath. Grace met his eyes with an expression that carried equal parts courage and concern. "Whatever happens in there," she said, nodding toward the hall, "you're not alone." That was something Dane had not heard in a very long time. The hearing began once the last of the folding chairs filled. Locals from all walks of life, retirees, fishermen, cafe workers, teenagers still smelling faintly of summer sunscreen, gathered with hushed curiosity. They were people who had known Ellie's music, Halo's steadfast presence, and Dane's quiet watchfulness long before any of them realized how their stories would intersect. At the front sat 3 community board members, including Lillian Rhodes, the chairwoman. Lillian was a woman in her early 70s, tall and dignified, with silver hair curled at her shoulders and a reputation for fairness strong enough to command silence from a restless room. She lifted her gavel lightly. "This session is to review the incident at the Summer Light Festival," she said, "and to hear testimony regarding past concerns relevant to community safety. We are here to listen, not to judge prematurely." Ellie's fingers tightened around the edge of her wheelchair. Dane laid a hand on her arm, grounding her. The first to speak was Ellis, Ellie's older cousin, a lean man with sandy hair and a weary look. He stepped forward with reluctance but sincerity, recounting the night of Ellie's accident 2 years ago. He described the screech of tires, the impact that sent Ellie into the guardrail, and the driver who fled before anyone could see his face. Next, Dr. Valerie Kent, the town's veterinarian, short, cheerful, with freckles and warm hazel eyes, presented medical records of Halo's injuries from the earlier altercation with Brent's group. Her voice softened at every mention of the dog's resilience. But the room truly shifted when Lillian signaled for the video to be played. Under the dimmed lights, the screen flickered to life, showing the underside of the wooden bridge, the loosened bolts, the pried open brackets. The moment Brent and his two accomplices set the charges. And finally, Dane's sharp voice. Switch seats. Just before the planned collapse failed. Gasps rippled through the hall. Brent's father stood abruptly, pale as moonlight, while Brent himself shrank deeper into his chair, sweat tracing a line at his temple. Then it was Dane's turn. He stood slowly, not accustomed to speaking publicly. His presence alone commanded attention, a tall man in his mid-50s with broad shoulders, short dark brown hair threaded with silver, and the quiet gravity of someone who had seen war and learned to walk gently afterward. His blue-gray eyes scanned the room, not threatening, not accusing, but steady as a held breath. "I didn't come here to hurt anybody," he began, "but I won't stand by when someone tries to endanger a woman who's already lost enough." He explained the first day he met Ellie, how Halo had been beaten, how Ellie had been mocked by Brent's group, how fear had lived in her voice, though she tried to hide it. He detailed what he saw, what he heard, and why he trusted his instincts. The Marines had sharpened those instincts, but Ellie's courage had given them purpose again. As he spoke, Halo rose quietly, stepping forward to rest his head against Ellie's knee. The gesture was simple, but something about it drew every eye. Re-hook moment. At that instant, Ellie's blind eyes lifted as, though sensing something beyond sound or touch. Halo's ears twitched sharply, not toward Brent, not toward the board, but toward the hall door behind them. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in his chest. For a heartbeat, Dane felt it too. A subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ellie whispered, "He knows something. Something's changing." The entire room leaned forward, as if waiting for the unseen to materialize. Then the tension passed, leaving only a haunting awareness that this truth-telling was just the beginning, not the end. The hearing resumed, but the mood was different, heavier, breathless. Finally, Dane spoke the words that silenced even the rustle of paper in the back row. "Ellie couldn't see the driver who hit her," he said, his voice low but carrying. "But she did hear him. She described his voice, and last night, when Brent shouted at her in the crowd, it was the same voice." The hall froze. Brent's mother covered her mouth. Tyler and Miles exchanged horrified looks. Even the community board seemed taken aback, fumbling for composure. Lillian Rhodes lifted a hand for quiet. "Mr. Calloway," she said slowly, addressing Brent's father, "I believe we need to pause for legal counsel." But before anyone moved, the hall door opened again. County Prosecutor Amelia Grant stepped inside, a woman in her early 40s with sharp cheekbones, brown hair pinned neatly, and a stride that spoke of certainty. She carried a leather briefcase and wore a charcoal blazer that contrasted with the hall's rustic wood. "I've seen the video," she announced. "I received the evidence Deputy Nolan sent overnight. Based on everything presented here today, I'm opening an official criminal investigation into the accident involving Ellie Hart." A stunned silence followed. Ellie inhaled sharply, a sound that was not fear, not relief, but the fragile beginning of hope. When Lillian brought down her gavel, the echo rolled through the hall like the first stone dropped into still water. "The board stands adjourned. Justice will proceed through the proper channels." The room slowly rose around them, some whispering, some crying, some looking away in shame. But Ellie sat unmoving, her hands softly trembling as she reached for Dane's. She didn't smile, not fully, but the tension in her shoulders eased, just enough for Dane to see the light beginning to return. For the first time in 2 years, the truth was no longer drowned beneath the lake. It was rising. The news traveled through Brightford faster than snowmelt, rushing down the mountain streams. Brent Calloway had been arrested. For the first time in years, the town breathed differently, lighter, as if someone had finally opened a window in a long, stale room. Headlines circulated through phones and local bulletin boards. Calloway charged in 2-year hit-and-run investigation. The charges were clear: assault, conspiracy to cause grievous harm, and obstruction of justice relating to the night Ellie Hart lost her sight and the use of her legs. Brent's lawyer, Simon Pike, a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s with thinning blonde hair, brushed back in a desperate attempt to appear polished, found himself under scrutiny as well. His voice, always smooth and condescending, now cracked during interviews. Rumors spread among courthouse clerks that he had threatened witnesses, and the district attorney's office opened a formal inquiry. Pike's reputation, once built on intimidation and backdoor deals, had begun to crumble. And Sergeant Mulligan, broad-shouldered, perpetually red-faced, with the temper of a man who believed authority existed to shield him, was forced into immediate retirement. His leadership failures, long whispered about, now stood in plain sight. Mulligan packed his belongings into 2 cardboard boxes, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway of the station he once ruled. No one offered a farewell. In Mulligan's place rose Grace Nolan, the young deputy who had quietly upheld justice even when pressured not to. She stood in front of the newly repainted precinct building, her chestnut hair pulled back, her uniform crisp, her brown eyes steady, and addressed the small crowd gathered for the announcement. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "From this day forward," she said, "Brightford Police Department serves truth first, not fear." Applause rose like birds taking flight, and Dane Carter, standing at the back of the crowd with Halo at his side, allowed himself a faint nod of respect. Grace had earned every ounce of the trust being offered to her now. Halo barked once, short and approving, as if acknowledging a shift in the air. Life, slowly but unmistakably, began reshaping itself. Ellie moved into a small cabin near the edge of the Whispering Pines forest. The cabin had once belonged to an elderly couple who, upon hearing of Ellie's circumstances, chose to sell it to her at a fraction of its value. Sunlight streamed through tall windows in the morning, and in the afternoon, shadows of pine branches danced across the walls like living brushstrokes. With money raised by neighbors, retired teachers, fishermen, town volunteers, Ellie received a high-quality guitar crafted with cedar and spruce wood. The instrument's warm tone filled the cabin with a softness no words could replicate. Halo often slept beside her wheelchair as she practiced, his paws twitching when she played melodies that echoed familiar emotions. Ellie decided to start something she once believed she'd never have the courage for: free guitar lessons for seniors, disabled youth, and fellow veterans. She held classes under the gazebo at Lake Bright Park, where the breeze carried the sound of her chords across the water. Dane watched from a distance one afternoon, leaning against a fence post, his rust-red coat stirred gently by the wind. The peaceful smiles on the students' faces tugged at something deep in him. He had begun to understand what Ellie already seemed to know. Healing didn't require noise. It required presence. Halo, now affectionately called the Peacekeeper by locals, had become Brightford's unofficial guardian. Children approached him with shy admiration, and elderly residents found comfort in his calm gaze. Dane still kept Halo trained, and occasionally people would see the shepherd sitting at the park entrance, ears up, as if measuring the world for threats only he could sense. Dane himself continued living in his forest cabin, a quiet place with walls that held the scent of pine and the memories of a long military life. But the cabin no longer felt like a bunker. He extended the front porch, adding a wooden railing and a small bench shaded by a crooked evergreen. He built it not for comfort, but for company, even if he hadn't admitted that to himself yet. Ellie visited in the early evenings, rolling down the freshly leveled path he had prepared. The air always smelled of sap and sun-warmed bark. Dane made coffee. Ellie tuned her guitar. Halo lay between them, like a gentle bridge, holding two worlds together. One evening, as the sky shifted from afternoon blue to a deepening gold, Ellie paused mid-song. Her fingers hovered above the strings. "Dane," she said softly, "you always hum before I play this one." Dane blinked. "I do?" She smiled faintly. "Every time." He cleared his throat, caught off guard. "Just a habit." But Halo's amber eyes flicked up at him, sharp and knowing, as though the shepherd understood something his human hadn't voiced yet. The wind stirred suddenly, not harsh but deliberate, brushing the chimes on Dane's porch. Halo rose, not in alarm, but slowly, reverently, and stepped toward the forest's edge. He stood perfectly still, tail low, ears forward. A moment passed where time felt suspended, as if the forest itself held its breath. Ellie lifted her face toward the sound. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. Dane wasn't sure what she meant, the chill in the air, the stirring among the branches, or the quiet certainty in Halo's posture. But something intangible pressed against his awareness, a sensation he hadn't felt since standing watch with Marines long gone. It felt like alignment, like presence, like three souls finding their place. Then the moment dissolved, and Halo returned to his usual calm. But neither Dane nor Ellie spoke for several seconds. As summer neared its end, the sun began to set earlier, painting the treetops with honey and ember tones. Ellie practiced a new melody she'd been composing, a gentle, rising piece that unfurled like morning light across water. She played it first at the forest cabin, her voice threading through the soft strumming. "It's the first song I ever heard from you," she told him quietly. "You hummed it without knowing. I just followed the sound." Dane was quiet for a long time. His eyes drifted toward the lake, where the fading light shimmered like a promise restored. Halo settled between them in the porch's final band of sunlight, his tail brushing Ellie's wheel and Dane's boot with equal affection. Dane looked down at him, then at Ellie, and something inside him, a weight he'd carried since the battlefield, softened. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel like the solitary Marine walking through life's cold corridors. Here, beneath the glowing edge of the forest, with Ellie's song rising gently into the air and Halo resting like a heartbeat between them, Dane understood a quiet truth. He was no longer alone. In the quiet spaces between our struggles and our courage, there is always room for a little miracle. Some call it luck, others call it grace, but many of us have felt that soft and steady presence, something greater than ourselves, guiding us through the shadows. Perhaps God does not always move mountains in front of us. Sometimes He simply lights a small lantern inside the heart, just enough to help us take the next step. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that healing is possible, even after long seasons of silence. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so these stories of hope and redemption can find more hearts to comfort. May God watch over you, your home, and everyone you love, today and every day.